Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Kat. And today's video topic is another one that has been heavily requested in my comment section. I've been asked frequently to talk about Anne Askew. And the more I've thought about it, the fact that I was going to do it this week in this month, strangely the more fitting it felt. Because of course we are in October, Halloween month. And Anne Askew's life, and especially the end of her life, is a bit of a horror show. So, with that being said, let's talk about it. Anne Askew was born in Lincolnshire in around 1521. Her father had been knighted in 1513 to make him Sir William Askew. He owned land in Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire, and he was made High Sheriff of Nottinghamshire in 1521, which was, of course, around the time that Anne was born. Evidently, this was a family on the rise, and vitally, it meant that Anne had been born into the gentry class. Anne had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and after her mother Elizabeth's death, her father remarried twice more, and thus provided Anne with 2 more half-brothers. It is believed that Anne was most likely tutored at home. Certainly, it seems she was well educated. In the narrative of her life, which is brought to us by John Bale, more on him in a moment, we are told that Anne's father had arranged for her elder sister Martha to marry one Thomas Kyme, but that unfortunately Martha had died before the marriage could take place. Sir William Askew was not happy to see his negotiations come to nothing. Master Kyme, after all, was the son and heir of a neighbouring farmer. This was a potentially valuable match. So Sir William decided that his second daughter, Anne, should be the next up to bat. John Bale may have been attempting to mould Anne's story into that of the traditional female martyr, because he asserts that her marriage was unwillingly entered into, that, quote, she was compelled against her will or free consent to marry with him, that she demeaned herself like a Christian wife, and thus had 2 children. Bale also informs us that during her marriage, Anne's faith underwent reform, and that, quote, by oft reading of the sacred Bible, she fell clearly from all old superstitions of papistry into a perfect belief in Jesus Christ. The alteration in Anne's faith appears to have become public knowledge in her local area, and indeed it led to her being warned by members of her local community. Rather than feeling threatened by this warning, she appears to have been emboldened. So much so that she took it upon herself to go to Lincoln Cathedral, set herself up there and visibly read the Bible. In this act, it seems that she had gone too far for Master Thomas Kyme. Perhaps he was embarrassed by these actions of his wife. Maybe he feared they might bring danger to his door, or even jeopardise his immortal soul. If she were a heretic, and he, her husband, supported her, was he therefore also supporting her heresy? Would it make it more difficult for him to get into heaven? Any or all of these causes may have been the reason that he allegedly forced her from the marital home violently. We think that Anne was most likely in London by the end of 1544. Possibly, she was hoping to formalise her separation from her husband legally. Alternatively, or perhaps additionally, she may have been seeking to capitalise on her family's court connections. In doing so, she may have been seeking to secure her own place in the world, and or further the cause of religious reform. Anne's brother Edward had served Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, a potential sign that Anne was not the only member of the Askew clan to occupy a reforming stance in religion. It may have been a shared religious ideology that endeared Edward to Cranmer and led to his further preferment, this time in the household of Cranmer's own master, the king. By the time Anne reached London, her brother Edward was Henry's cupbearer. Additionally, her sister Jane was married to the lawyer George St. Pol. He served the Duke and Duchess of Suffolk. They were Henry VIII's best friend Charles Brandon and his wife Katherine. Alongside these family connections to the court, Anne had created her own circle, made up of devout reformers, including the chronicler Edward Hall and the future martyrs John Lascelles and Joan Butcher. Sir Thomas Wriothesley, and that name may ring bells for those of you who have read or seen Wolf Hall, because he is the very same Call Me Wriothesley. Wriothesley had profited handsomely from the dissolution of the monasteries and had diligently served one of its architects, Thomas Cromwell. However, he also clearly felt an allegiance, or perhaps saw a means of greater preferment, through his former tutor, the devout conservative in matters of faith, Bishop Stephen Gardiner. Sir Thomas Wriothesley had Anne Askew in his crosshairs. Wriothesley employed a man called Wadlow to rent rooms near to Askew's and spy on her. Despite watching her for seemingly a number of days, Wadlow was apparently unable to find anything incriminating against her. But others were also moving to implicate her, and the Alderman of London found a woman who was prepared to offer testimony against Anne. Anne was detained on the 10th of March 1545. Those who imprisoned her were determined to prove that she was in breach of the Act of 6 Articles, which had become law 6 years previously in 1539. Anne was interrogated on a charge of heresy. The 6 Articles of 1539 are as follows. First, that in the most blessed sacrament of the altar, by the strength and efficacy of Christ's mighty word, it being spoken by the priest, is present really, under the form of bread and wine, the natural body and blood of our Saviour Jesus Christ, conceived of the Virgin Mary, and that after the consecration there remaineth no substance of bread or wine, nor any other substance, but the substance of Christ, God and man. Secondly, that communion in both kinds is not necessary ad salutem by the law of God to all persons, and that it is to be believed and not doubted of, but that in the flesh, under the form of bread, is the very blood, and with the blood, under the form of wine, is the very flesh, as well apart as though they were both together. Thirdly, that priests, after the order of priesthood received as afore, may not marry, by the law of God. Fourthly, that vows of chastity or widowhood, by man or woman made to God advisedly, ought to be observed by the law of God, and that it exempts them from other liberties of Christian people, which without that they might enjoy. Fifthly, that it is meet and necessary that private masses be continued and admitted in this the King's English Church and Congregation, whereby good Christian people, ordering themselves accordingly, do receive both godly and goodly consolations and benefits, and it is agreeable also to God's law. Sixthly, that auricular confession is expedient, and necessary to be retained and continued, used and frequented in the Church of God. In short, the 6 Articles upheld the doctrine of transubstantiation, the view that one need not receive both bread and wine at communion, the obligation for celibacy in priests, the binding character of vows of chastity, the value of private masses, and also of auricular confession. For most, if not all reformers, this act represented nothing more than a return to superstition. On this occasion, Anne was held for nearly a fortnight, and she was interrogated at least twice. During this time, her inquisitors included one Christopher Dare, also the Lord Mayor of London, William Laxton, the Chancellor of the Bishop of London, Edmund Bonner, and Bonner's Archdeacon, John Wymesley. Helpfully, Anne wrote an account of these and later interrogations that she was subjected to. These accounts were then edited and printed by John Bale and then subsequently by John Fox in Acts and Monuments, also known as the Book of Martyrs. And I will leave a link to the Book of Martyrs, to the passage dealing with Anne's interrogation, in the description box beneath this video. In her account of these interrogations, Anne's reports of her answers are occasionally equivocal and riddling, but they always show that she maintains her faith in Reformed religion and pronounced it. Anne's friends managed to get her bailed out. She may or may not have recanted her faith at this time. Unfortunately, this reprieve would not last long. Anne's estranged husband was summoned to appear before the Privy Council with his wife. They attended, as ordered, on the 19th of June 1546, at which point Thomas denied that he was Anne's husband. He was allowed to leave. She was held at Greenwich, so that she could be questioned further about her suspected heresies. This time, her interrogators had grown in number and also in rank. There was once again the Chancellor, Sir Thomas Risley. Again, Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester. There was also John Dudley, Viscount Lisle, and William Parr, the Earl of Essex, and Sir William Paget, who was the King's principal secretary. As with the previous inquisitions, we have Anne's account of this questioning too, and she reports answering the questions in accordance with her own faith once again. We also have Anne's account of an interaction that she had with the Bishop of Winchester, Stephen Gardiner. Gardiner, perhaps frustrated with Anne, told her that, quote, she spake in parables, and later that she, quote, should be burnt. Despite these threats, however, Anne refused to recant her faith. Anne was transferred to Newgate Prison, where her questioning would continue. She was arraigned for heresy on the 28th of June 1546, but her antagonists were not finished with her. Her first run-in with religious conservatives in 1545 had apparently been solely concerned with Anne, her beliefs, the things she had said, and also the material she owned and was reading. By 1546, her recantation would not be enough for them, because they thought she could name names in their search for heretics at court. Anne was once more transferred, this time to the dread fortress of the Tower of London. Here, her interrogators, Risley and Sir Richard Rich, were intent on discovering if any at court had offered her support. They asked about members of the Privy Council, and, by name, they asked after My Lady of Suffolk, My Lady of Sussex, My Lady of Hertford, My Lady Denny, and My Lady Fitzwilliams. These were ladies that surrounded Queen Catherine Parr, and this line of questioning was part of a much longer-running scheme to bring the Queen down. In many ways, Anne Askew was highly unlucky to be caught in the crossfire. Months before Anne and her estranged husband had been summoned before the Privy Council to give an account of themselves, in February 1546, Gardiner, Risley, Rich and William Paget were already conspiring to destroy the Queen. They were concerned that this Queen, of a reforming persuasion, might be the person that Henry left as regent after his own death to support the minority rule of his son and heir, the future Edward VI. Gardiner, Risley, Rich and Paget were keen to ensure that she simply would not be available to fill this role, on account of the fact they wanted to make sure that she'd be dead. In order to achieve this, they started to cast about for evidence, to build a case that would see her arrested, convicted and executed as a heretic. Anne would not give Risley and Rich what they wanted, and so the extraordinary decision was made to resort to torture. Anne's sex and her social status, the fact that she was gently born, should have exempted her twice over. But Risley and Rich proved zealous. In fact, they went so far as to turn the rack themselves. In a moment, I'm going to put up an image of the rack in action, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how it functioned and the damage it caused. It is not my intention to be gratuitous in any way, but nevertheless, this might be upsetting, and this content may not be suitable for all viewers and listeners. So I will leave a timestamp that states when this particular section ends if you want to skip it. Here we have an image from Fox's Acts and Monuments, also known, as I said, as the Book of Martyrs. This is a woodcut showing the rack in action. The rack works by putting the joints of the body under stress. and this stressing of the joints would take place over a long period of time. It can take hours, it can take days. The length of time all depends on the particular depravity of the people involved in turning the rack. It works by putting the joints of the body under such stress that, in extreme cases, when the victim proves obstinate, the limbs will dislocate. The tendons, muscles and ligaments will stretch and tear. The effects of this will last a lifetime, however long that lifetime might be. For Anne, perhaps fortunately in her case, it would only be a matter of weeks. As a result of the brutality that she was subjected to, Anne did make a disclosure, but it was a minuscule one, nowhere near enough to bring anything close to charges against anybody else. But she was eventually compelled to admit that she had been given money by two men, who claimed to be acting for the Lady Hertford and the Lady Denny. In terms of any other support she received, she claimed that her maid had apparently obtained money on her behalf from London apprentices, those who were sympathetic to her plight. Although Anne's words did not provide sufficient cause to act against the Queen, Gardiner was determined, and so he pivoted to focus on the content of her library. An arrest warrant was issued against Catherine Parr. Arguably, she was only saved by the fact that she obtained prior knowledge of the plan to arrest her, and that she managed, through her terror, to sufficiently subjugate herself before her husband in order to mollify him sufficiently to get him to cancel the warrant. We believe that Queen Catherine Parr's most dangerous moment, this brush with arrest, was happening at around about the same time that Anne Askew was being prepared for her own execution. Had Queen Catherine Parr been in a better, more secure position with her husband, perhaps she may have been able to intercede and beg for mercy on Anne Askew's behalf. But Queen Catherine Parr was in danger herself. She had her own arrest and potential execution to escape. Anne Askew would not be so lucky. Following the torture, Anne was given time to recover before being taken to Newgate to await her execution. As she was a convicted and unapologetic heretic, the punishment she would suffer would be burning. On the 16th of July, 1546, Anne Askew was transported to Smithfield to suffer at the stake. She was to die alongside three others, including her friend, a member of her circle that I mentioned at the start of this video, John Lascelles. According to an eyewitness at Smithfield that day, one John Luth, Anne was so racked that she could not stand. She had to be carried or held up by two sergeants, and when placing her on the stake to be burned, she had to be tied to a seat rather than being left upright. In her suffering on the rack and at the stake, Anne Askew was made into a martyr and would be recognised as a Protestant saint. But for me, the seeds of her suffering, and arguably the suffering of so many others, were planted by Henry VIII. In his decision to break with the Church in Rome, but not set down a clear, mandated faith for his nation, a path which the Church of England would follow and not deviate from, he is, I think, to blame. The fact that the Church of England keeps changing in character throughout his reign and the reigns of his children leads to so many problems. Henry is the great equivocator, and he loves faction. He fosters it, allows it to thrive at his court. He lets traditionalist and reformer sit side by side, and he encourages them to go to war with each other. He doesn't mind when that infighting spills over into bloodshed, because by equivocating, by maintaining faction, he divides and conquers. He keeps the court busy fighting amongst themselves, and so he keeps his firm grasp on his power, on his crown, and also on his headship of the Church of England. It was a lesson that his daughter Elizabeth learnt well and profited from. But there was a price. Because the character of the Church of England kept changing, people suffered and died. If you are the sort of person who takes a, shall we say, pragmatic approach to life, then I think you probably were going to be fine in Henry's England and in Henry's church. If you're prepared to turn a sixpence in matters of faith in order to preserve life and limb, well, you're going to get along. But if you were a true believer, as Anne Askew seems to have been, then your story is going to be quite different. As a reformer, when she looked at the Act of 6 Articles, what it is asking and demanding of her would have felt like a heresy. She would have seen it as papistry and superstition. But by not following it, in the eyes of her nation and the English Church, she was the heretic. If neither will bend, something has to break. It seems, in this case, it would be Anne's body. But what do you think? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversation in the comments section underneath this video. Or you can come and find me over on my social media. I'll leave links to my Instagram and Twitter in the description box. You can follow me there and we can continue this conversation. I do hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then please let me know by hitting the thumbs up. Please also subscribe to this channel, and while you're there, hit the notification bell beside the subscribe button so that YouTube tells you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.